Hi, everybody, and welcome to the European VC podcast. I am Andreas, and I'll be your sole host for today because David is out flying high above us all on his way back from Tech Barbecue in Copenhagen. Today, we have with us Juliette Audet, and she is a partner at Forbion, a multi-stage venture fund in Amsterdam and Munich, backing biotech companies in Europe and North America to impact the future of medicine. Forbion is investing out of two separate funds, Forbion Ventures Fund 6 and Forbion Growth Opportunities Fund 2, of 750 million euros and 600 million respectively, with a total of 3 billion euro AUM and an established portfolio of 44 companies, with notable investments including NewAmsterdam Pharma, Gyroscope, and Inflazome. At Forbion, Juliette focuses on the venture strategy, investing in biotech companies from preclinical stage to phase 1B, and led the investments in NewAmsterdam Pharma, Mestag, and Dualyx, amongst others. As you can all hear, this is going to be one of the technical episodes where we're going to dive into a space that I'm not usually most well versed in, so I'm sure I'll do many more proverbial fuck-ups than this. If you're listening into the show, do drop us a review, follow the pod, and subscribe at EU.VC.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
United and determined, we can serve as a model for other regions of the world.
The nature of a problem requires a European response.
Europe is a story of new beginnings, new beginnings.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Let's get this thing started with how you got into venture. Tell us your story.
Great. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here. So my journey into venture was not the straightest, but I think it's the case for many. So I'm a scientist by training, but I'm a physicist, not a biologist, which actually does matter for the work that I do. I started my career in consulting. I was at McKinsey & Company. I've actually very quickly oriented myself towards pharma and biotech. That was mostly because this is where I could find purpose in what I was doing, and I cared about that. So worked in consulting for a while, and then I worked at Novartis in strategy. And I have to say, when I was in strategy, I was missing engaging with science. And so I was really interested in a career that would allow me to really combine the science and the business together. I have to say I was fortunate enough to have in strategy a boss that I had a change of boss, and then I had a little bit more flexibility for a couple of months. I went to see the Novartis Venture Fund, the head of the Novartis Venture Fund, Anja Koenig, and I said, here I am. I would love to learn more about venture capital. Can I work with you for a couple of months and see how it goes? And I have to say, I was also very lucky because Anja Koenig has a very similar background to mine. She's a physicist. She's also went to McKinsey, and then she is still the head of the Novartis Venture Fund that does only biotech investments. And so she gave me a chance. It has been an incredibly steep learning curve when I started, which was a little bit daunting at the beginning, but also incredibly exciting. And I think this is also what I love about this job. It's I learn every day.
And on the cue of learning, I'd love to ask you to tell us a bit about a pivotal moment in your career.
This is not the most common part either, but I grew up and I did a professional ballet training until I was 18, and I was doing that in parallel next to school. So because my parents didn't allow me to not do the normal school, which I'm very grateful now for, but obviously at the time as a angsty teenager, I was not very happy about.
Yeah.
But I think it taught me incredible discipline because obviously I had to manage both the normal school and then more than 30 hours of training per week. It also gave me, I think, I learned the power of training and trying and failing and starting over and learning from your mistake of what can I do differently to make it better. And then actually, when I was 18, I tore my Achilles tendon, which meant that my ballet career was over. And that happened in the last year of high school. And I had to turn things around very quickly and figure out, okay, what do I want to do? Like now that this part of like the path that I was on is done.
Yeah.
what do I do? So like I had to, while doing surgery and rehab and all those things, I had to find a new path and, find a university, apply, and then go on my way. So I think it taught me a lot of resilience, but also the power of seeing new paths when one falls through. And I think it's helpful in the startup and venture capital environment.
Yeah, I imagine it's something you do on quite often when you're talking to founders about the fact that sometimes we have to fold.
I think it's recognizing when it's the moment to fold. Sometimes in the scientific environment, I think this is also the chance that we have that sometimes when the experiments don't work, you have to figure out, well, why don't they work? But then if they give you a very clear signal of like, this is non-progressible, you can get very, very clear signals from the data, which I think that sometimes, if you're thinking more about the tech environment, or you have a product on the market, sometimes the feedback of the market is not as direct. So which is something that I think in the investments that we do, that I do, you can rely a little bit more on the science and what it tells you.
We're most likely also going to talk about this, but I know it's a topic that matters a lot to you, which is training and building up newer VCs. And I'd be curious to ask you about this part specifically. It's an incredibly important skill for a VC. I think the best VCs out there are also the best coaches. And building that skill set in someone who was hired into a firm is not necessarily the easiest. And that's, of course, also why it's a long path to partner and a long path to the board seats and leading investments, where you have this responsibility of being able to work through this with empathy with founders. I'd love to ask you how you think about building this type of skill set into people that doesn't necessarily have that type of experience in their baggage.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because, especially in the field that I work in, the profile of people we recruit is people that are very scientifically driven, usually PhDs, and they come here and I keep on telling them it's all about the people. This is a people's business, which obviously is something that they need to reconcile with. And obviously, it's all about the science as well. And we need to have the science in place to make an investment and to really be convinced. And this is the base for being convinced about an investment. But then, the science needs to be there. But then on top of that, we really need to understand how do we interact with not only with the founders, but also we usually syndicate our deals. So we have co-investors. And so what is the dynamic at play? And so I like to involve the junior team members early on into the decision-making process and how it works, and also make them understand very quickly that our role on the board is not someone where we can say, no, this is how we do it. I want X to be done. And because this is all about influencing and really understanding the different perspective and how do you get to move a board all together, because ultimately it's almost like an animal. It's a team on itself. You have to really shape it and really understand what is the dynamic as a whole. So
the board role in particular is of course an important one, but it's also one that until you get there, it's not always that you have the opportunity to sit on the boards. Do you tend to allow your associates and principals coming up to join us as bystanders?
I think that's a really important thing. We try to always have an observer seat for our team members, and this is really for training purposes. I think very often the analysts and associates and principal are the one that have gone like the deepest into the science. So usually they also bring something to the table. It's not only about learning, but that is important. But I think the part that's also important in my relationship as a board member and my observer is also to help them understand what actually happens on the spot in the meeting versus what happens outside. And ultimately, this is something that I was quite amazed. You always think about the big board meetings and like important people around the big table, and then you realize that actually everything happened outside of the board meeting, and then you get into the board meeting, and that's where you formalize the decision. But unless you really want to create,
and that's oftentimes the difference between a functional and dysfunctional board, right? Whether things are actually being done before and versus after or during. Let's continue here a bit, and I'm mindful that we're blowing every script here, but I do think that this board dynamic is incredibly important and something that might actually be the difference between a VC startup and a non-VC startup in many ways, because it's an incredibly valuable tool if it is used correctly and if everyone knows how to do that. Could you tell me a bit about your playbook, how you go about that, and at what point you come in and say, okay, let's actually create that board, and this is how I think about it, and so on. And do you usually take the board chair seat so that you are the person with more, let's call it, weight in terms of deciding how to run the board versus a normal board member?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. So for us, the board composition is something that is negotiated at term sheet already. Yeah. So this is something that we already think very carefully about. What is going to be the power dynamic? Obviously, you need to reflect somewhat the shareholder structure, but it's also what people can bring to the table, what is needed for the company, and then also how is the dynamic gonna work out. So if you think about specific situation of you have a very large company with a lot of board members, and then they raise only a small amount of money, you can't rehold the whole board. Yeah. But at the same time, as a new board member, you still need to make sure that your voice is being heard. So how do you ensure that this mechanics actually happens? And so we usually use thresholds of, for example, investor director majority, where you say, well, we're for investor director majority, you need to have at least 3 of them that agree, and for any decision to be taken. And I think this is usually, we never want, and I think this is also not good for the company, is like you don't want anyone to have a veto. And I think that's the dynamic that we're trying to create, is you need to have enough consensus, but you also don't want the veto. And so how do you structure that?
And how about fostering that dynamic around the board where the majority of the work happens before the board meeting? Because I've been in boards where it's definitely what happened between some board members and the founder, but not everyone. And that can be a tough thing to straddle.
Well, I think there's 2 ways it happens. Either you're the initiator of a conversation, and then you can decide who you want to talk to and who you don't want to talk to, which might be a strategy, right? Yeah. And then there's the other option where it's like someone else took the decision, they want to pass something, and they've decided either to include you or not include you. And so it's always a fine balance, and like trying to get to know on which side of the table you are. I think just getting to know your co-board members is something that is really important. At the end of the day, you're a team, and so you need to operate as a team. And so all the good learning and good leadership advice about team management needs to be applied also to the board. It's not just a collection of individuals. And so I think the most effective way, honestly, is to pick up your phone and say, "Hey, have you read the board deck?"
Yeah.
And see what's on their mind.
Yeah. Could I push you to just give me like your 3 core messages around building an effective board? Could I quiz you on that?
Yeah, no, but that I will try it. The first one is governance. So this is good governance, and so this is really thinking through legally how it's enshrined into your agreements, because those things, when your board works well, you never go back to it. Never. When everything goes wrong, this is where you absolutely need those things to be airtight.
And a note on that, right? Because that's what we've just gone through, a period where honestly VC turned quite light on that, and that was how you got into deals, and you gave founders more rights and so on.
Yeah.
And we're seeing VCs being bit in the back by this now, right?
Absolutely. And so I always think this is the governance thing is actually, it's always painful to negotiate, because you need to be very strict on what it means. And so people always think, oh, but like, what are you thinking about that it's going to go so wrong? And it's like, no, I hope we never touch it. I hope we never see it ever again. But if we need to go back to it, it needs to be airtight.
Yeah.
So governance is the first thing.
Do you have on governance, do you have any red lines?
So the way I think about it usually is with a cap table in front of me. Yeah. And I look at the cap table and I just try to do any possible combination of investors to see when do they get to investors and shareholders and founders. Yeah. When do they get to the majority? Yeah. And I try any single possible, like it's very easy to do, right? Like you just on your Excel.
It's like my sister's getting married, so it's like putting together the the table arrangement and seeing how could this work out. Yeah. Exactly.
And who's gonna fight with whom, and exactly. And who cannot be sitting together, like exactly that.
Yeah. I like that.
So yeah, I think that's the governance part. Then the second part, I would say, get to know your board members. So I think at the try to be there for board dinners and so on. And I know as VCs you tend to sit on a lot of boards, and so having all those board dinners like that come in, and they all come, like it's board season at the moment, and we all have like 2 or 3 board meetings a week, and it's exhausting. Yeah. But trying to be there, getting to know the people behind the board member is always helpful, because then you can pick up your phone very easily and be like, hey, what happened, or what is happening, or what do you want? So I think it's really trying to create that relationship.
What are your views on virtual board meetings? Keeping that in mind.
So I think that, yeah, I still want to do virtual board meetings. I think, if this is one thing that the positive that the pandemic has brought is that we can do a lot of our business remotely. It's more effective in the sense of time spent. You get the full team around the table in an easier way. It's also better for the environment because we're not crazy flying. But the other part is that there is so much that you can get to know someone just over video. So I think usually the way that actually we write it in our investment documents that we usually ask for 5 board meetings, roughly 5 board meetings a year, and we ask for 2 to be in person. Yeah. So it's still majority virtual, but some companies, depending on where they are, where the investors are, sometimes it's easier. So we do it in person a little bit more often. And then we try to ask people that for those board meetings, everybody shows up.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. So first one was governance. Second is get to know your board members. Do you have a third one for me?
I'm going to say it's a little bit obvious, but I'm going to say preparation. Read your board deck. And it's... You'd be surprised sometimes with people who ask questions and you're like, that was in the board deck, like 2 pages down. So yes, it has not been presented yet, but people get really angsty about something. It might be a little bit obvious, but I think preparation is everything. And it also means usually that you can get the founders and the team, the operating team, the management, very much on your side because you've done your homework. You're here to ultimately provide value, and so you've taken up your responsibility to do that.
I respect that a lot, and I, having been an EA at a point in my life, that was a very bad feeling, sitting there knowing how much you battled over the deck before, and getting everyone in the company involved in making sure that we had it, or in the senior leadership to make sure that everything is as it should be, and then you can just see, fuck, this guy didn't read it, and now he's gonna go on the rant that he usually does. So, all right, let's get into the next section, which is our take a stance round.
Take a stance.
All right, Juliette. Now I will ask you to comment on this quote from Sabine Visander from Random, which reads,
I think VCs add way less value than they think they do. They're less pivotal to the businesses they're advising.
This quote makes me chuckle. I think it's the dirty little secret of VC. So I actually wouldn't say it's like way less, but I think it's different. I think VCs are an essential part of the innovation ecosystem, and they provide very much needed risk capital that is not available otherwise. So I think that the strengths of the VCs on board and for entrepreneurs is twofold: is network, and because we see a lot of people, we see a lot of companies and so on. And the other part of it is also a byproduct of the number of companies that we see is, what does the market look like? What is the visibility? We see a lot of company. We have benchmarks. We see all the different elements of a company building process. And so we've seen a lot of things work. And so we do have this strategic perspective on things that, we've seen this like 5 times has been used, and 3 out of those 5 times it worked really well because the CEO did X, Y, Z. But then if you don't do Z, then it falls through. And so sharing those perspectives is something that is very, very helpful, like providing this external perspective. I think that's definitely helpful. I think that our role as VC is one of breadth and not necessarily one of depth. What we bring to the table is rarely, and I say rarely because some people are absolute experts and some VCs are absolute experts into certain areas. But fundamentally, and I'm going to speak about the biotech VC environment, is like, so I could have done a PhD on like a very specific part of oncology, and then I'm going to be doing investment in an epilepsy company. I still need to learn about that. There's a lot of things that are transferable, but so I cannot be both an oncology and an epilepsy expert. So, I think our strength is also to bring that epilepsy expert to the table and help, develop the company. So yeah, the quote made me chuckle.
I think we all laugh a little bit when we see that. All right, Juliette, now I want to get into our deep dive section, and I am looking forward to be talking to you about exit strategies in biotech, because this is quite different from what we have in the rest of the VC market. And I am a complete newbie here. I've never been in this space. So tread lightly when I ask stupid questions, but take us into it. Tell us what's happening right now in the market and what are the dynamics that you should think about when you're doing something in this space.
Absolutely. And no stupid question. We learn every day, right? That's what we like. So I think a biotech company inherently is an animal that is very different from what we know from the biotech VC in general. So a biotech company is a company that for a really long time is going to spend a lot of money, a lot. So several millions that are going to be spent. And usually the company will never see the day of profit. I mean, we've seen that, Uber and Airbnb just turned a profit. So finally, it takes a long time for them as well.
But it's doable.
Indeed. But the way that it works is that usually a biotech VCs will exit the biotech company before it turns any profit. And then the other part of it that is quite different, I think, from more tech or product-oriented portfolio companies is that we have very binary moments in the drug development. So it's you do all your safety studies, and if they're not clean, they're not clean. Your asset is dead, and it's over. You don't want to bring it forward in any case, like ethically and all the things, but it's over. So you put a lot of capital to risk with a lot of moments that are very binary. And so the exit landscape that we have usually is big pharma saying, I like this asset, I think it's interesting for my pipeline, so I'm gonna go buy this company. That is usually what you want. And so, there's a lot of talk in the biotech VC space where people are saying, oh, we've exited, we've gone public. And I'm like, well, but you haven't exited, actually. You're still in the company. And now, yes, you can exit slowly, but you can't dump all your shares onto the market at once because obviously you're going to... some people are going to be very angry on what you do with the share price. And so I think that, part of our due diligence process is also trying to really understand what is happening in big pharma, trying to understand what are the therapeutic areas that they're interested in. Like, are they more interested in oncology, or are they more interested in immunology, or are they more interested in rare diseases? And then within each of those, like, what is specifically something that they're looking for that they don't have internally that they're going to have to buy externally? And so that is really part of our process. So we talk to a lot of pharma BD during our due diligence process. That is usually how it works. Something that has been happening recently is quite an interesting dynamic, because pharma has several hundreds of billion of capital available for acquisition. So their war chests are full. The other part of it is pharma. I think I was reading a statistic recently that 42% of the revenues of last year for big pharma came from assets that will have a patent cliff within 6 years. So that means that, you know, their revenues are going to go down, and so that's coming. And so they have a lot of money, and they need a lot of source of revenue for the next couple of years. But at the same time, they want something.
Could I ask you the dynamic behind that inflection point, or whatever you call it in industry, or sudden maturation of the of the patents? Because I guess that would speak to the fact that there's been a period in time where there was less innovation, and for that reason there weren't any or many new blockbuster drugs coming out in that period.
Yeah, so I think it's not that the innovation has continued throughout, but then you know, a number of things fall, and so I think what has happened, to be honest, is that pharma has not invested enough in, you know, filling that pipeline. And maybe, you know, things were going great, they were selling a lot of their drugs, and so there was less pull to actually get something through the pipeline because it was all great. And so I think maybe now it's like getting to the point that they really need to do it, because 6 years is soon.
Does that then mean, Juliette, that you're seeing, because war chest's full, we're seeing that they're going to have a problem down the line? Are they very attentive to that and trying to course correct? And for that reason, you would argue that we're really seeing a boom in biotech?
So not yet. I would like to see it.
You're waiting for it. You're waiting for it. That's what you're telling LPs.
I'm saying exactly. I'm saying that they have all the, you know, everything is aligned
all the prerequisites
to actually execute on that.
Yeah.
They have the money and they need it. What else do you want? No, but so there has been a slump in the M&A, you know, with the whole market going down, and so there has been a slump in the M&A activity as well as in the broader environment. But in Pharma-Biotech, there has been a slump. We're seeing a little bit of a pickup in 2023. We're seeing that it's starting to pick up, but I think it's becoming more and more of a conversation. And also, you know, when you hear analysts on the street talking about those big pharma, they're also talking about that. When are you going to buy it? What are you going to buy? What is your strategy for acquisition, and so on? So there's a push from the market. So I'm hoping it's going to translate, but it hasn't really fully translated yet. But the interesting part is that because the patent cliff and the fall of revenues is so close in time, the big pharma are looking for later stage assets.
Yeah, so they're looking for stuff that will be ready to go out in 6 years.
Exactly. And that is new. And so that means that, you know, biotech, big pharma in the past has been also like more amenable to, oh, this is really interesting. This has not gone into human, but we like the target. The compound looks good. We're going to buy that. But that still means that you have to go through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And, you know, that's several years of development, depending on the indication. But, you know, 5 to 10 years of development.
We said in the beginning, and now I'm going to show that I'm a novice here. We said in the beginning that you are focused on the preclinical stage to phase 1B.
Yes.
How does that translate to what we just spoke about?
So this is still pretty early. So very quickly, preclinical is everything that we test in a test tube, and then in mice, and then monkeys usually. And then there's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1, we try. That's very big picture. Phase 1, we test the drug into healthy people to just see make sure that it's safe. Small number of healthy people. Then phase 2 is small number of people with the disease to make sure still that it's safe, but also that it works in the disease. And phase 3 is you actually do it in a large number of people, make sure that it's statistically true. The signal that you've seen in phase 2 is statistically true. And then you get FDA approval. So, and in between you have FDA interactions or EMA in Europe, EMA interactions between each of the steps.
And if we had David on this call, he could have schooled us in that as well, because he's been very much into that. I, on the other hand, know nothing. Okay, but then I'm curious to understand, because another thing which is interesting about the biotech space, which is CVCs are not, as in normal VC, I wouldn't say frowned upon, but not always looked at with the same eyes as you would a purely private VC. But that is actually a bit flipped in biotech, right? Because CVCs carry a very strong reputation, because they're also the acquirer in the end. So could you tell me a bit about the dynamic between CVCs and purebred VCs?
Yeah, institutional investors. So, I mean, I was at both. So, I used to be at the Novartis Venture Fund, and now at Forbion, we're an institutional fund. So there's I would say two branches of CVCs in biotech, some that are fully financially driven, and actually the Novartis Venture Fund is fully financially driven, but then you have the fully strategically aligned CVCs. So there's a number of those that basically take whatever the strategy of the company is, so let's say Pfizer, and they say they want to invest in those three areas, and they're going to be looking at something that complements what is already done within the company. So some CVC actually look at complementarity. Some look at what is the space that we're not investing in and that we should be, and so we have at least a little bit of a foot in it. That's different strategy within it, but it's always linked to the strategy of the mother company. And so I would say usually, for me as a co-investor I'm co-invested with a number of corporate venture funds. Usually, the type of people and the type of knowledge that they bring is very similar, and so it's a high expertise environment. The really good thing that they bring as well is connection within the organization, and so you can leverage on scientists. You can leverage obviously within the bounds of like confidentialities and making sure that stuff doesn't leak all directions.
That's exactly why I did the tie into exit strategies, right? Because I imagine getting them in already at phase 1B is incredibly valuable, because that you have then the eyes of the behemoth that might be an acquirer.
Yes. That being said, not a lot of, surprisingly, I don't know the stats exactly.
You haven't seen too many actual...
Actually buying by the one that, so, sometimes you might have like the Sanofi Ventures that is invested in a company, and then, Pfizer buys it. But yeah, I do think it brings also a lot of the pharma perspective that we need also to understand how pharma thinks about this indication, this application, this patient population, and so on. So they bring a lot of things around the table, in addition to bringing capital, which we do as well, obviously.
Okay, so now I will let you just give us a very short description or pro biotech course here before we go into the shoutout section, because this is what many don't know, I think, is biotech is actually oftentimes outperforming normal VC. And that's often because even though it's very binary, it is in many ways a bit more, you've got a clear playbook for pharma. And if you know, or biotech, and if you know how to run that and what to read, then it is in a way slightly more predictable than okay, we're going to do a tier scooter company and going to maybe get everyone to ride scooters around the cities of Europe.
That's fair. I wish I could say that also to my LPs. It's like, we're totally predictable. That's
it depends on the eyes that behold, right?
Obviously. No, but I think as we were mentioning at the beginning of the conversation, is we're basing the investment on a relatively limited number of events. It's based on the science of, is it working? Versus, launching micromobility things also depends on the demand, and maybe in one city is going to work and another city is not going to work. So it really depends on the market that you have and the pool that you have, versus the product that we're selling here is a very contained one that has also a lot of regulatory framework around it, which is a regulatory framework to actually get it to the patient, a regulatory framework to prescribe it to the patient, and another regulatory framework to actually pay for it. So there's a lot of, I would say, guardrail for the product around it.
Okay, now let's head into the shoutout section.
Love is in the air, everywhere I look around.
Now, Juliette, I would love to ask you to give a shout out to a co-investor, angel, or LP for just simply being awesome. And do also share us the story behind that.
I will. So the person I find awesome is Julie Grant from Canaan. I actually met Julie we were conducting due diligence on the company together. And I would say, as most people in the industry, she has a very strong scientific background, but Julie not only brought this with a lot of humility to the table, but also she's someone that doesn't leave any stone unturned and will not hesitate to bring experts in, and is always ready to evaluate new information, opinions, approaches. And I think ultimately she brings all this with incredible presence. She's very calm, firm, but at the same time she's joyful and warm. I want to know her secrets.
I love that. And I think it's almost the first time that we have someone on the pod not screaming out the glories of one of their LPs. So thank you for bringing in a co-investor.
We have great LPs as well.
Now let's get into the 3 biggest learnings of your life. And I just want to give it to you like this. Tell me, what are the most important things that you've learned for the last 10 years?
I think what I'm going to say is not going to surprise you. I've said it already. One, it's all about the people. All about the people. It's in the teams that you choose to work with, in your portfolio, on the board, or in the VC that you're working in. Then the second one is it's all about the balance. You won't be fulfilled by having only work in your life, and so find your hobby, your family. Be curious, be open to opportunities, and also bring those external things into your work. And the last one, I will say, it's all about not confusing confidence for competence. Like, don't be confused and don't confuse people.
I like the last one. So you say you really think that we should be fulfilled, and I hear that from many. And then they say let's focus on hobbies and family. Let me ask you, what is then your main pastime activity that takes you out of VC?
Well, it takes me out of VC. I was going to say skiing, but funnily enough, skiing is the golfing for VCs. It's actually quite incredible. Like it's like I've never skied as much with VC colleagues as I've done any other sports. So it's actually quite funny.
See, I think it's skiing or surfing. Surfing, especially during the Web3 hypes.
Maybe that's the difference between the tech VC and the biotech VC. I think biotech VCs, they ski. Like, trust me, they ski.
I love that. Now let's head into the quick fire round.
And now, the quick fire round. Quick fire.
Juliette, what advice would you give to your own 10-year younger self?
Yeah, I think I would say be very intentional about what you want to achieve, how you want to live your life. So intentionality.
And what are your top tips for emerging VCs across Europe for fundraising?
Get to know your LPs. That's and give them a shout out on a podcast maybe.
Yes.
No, but I think it's really important to understand what success looks like for them and how can you help them achieve it. Once you can answer those questions, like, you will be on the right track for fundraising.
And finally, what's the most counterintuitive thing you've learned since you started in venture?
I think it's so, in a very scientifically driven background, like even in that investment area, there's still a lot of judgment and subjectivity that goes into assessing companies and choosing your investments. So it's still more an art than a science, even in a scientifically driven one.
Thank you so much for joining us, Juliette, and to everyone listening in. Thank you so much for always being here. And if you enjoyed this episode, do drop us a review, follow the pod, and subscribe at eu.vc.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
United and determined, we can serve as a model for other regions of the world.
The nature of a problem requires a European response.
Europe is a story of new beginnings. New beginnings.
Let's start acting.